Power Rangers is no stranger to dark magic. I know that might sound a little bit weird, it is a kid's show after all, but yeah, there are multiple teams of Rangers whose primary villain group is just straight up actual demons, so dark magic definitely exists in this universe. Given that it is a kid's show, of course, they don't often address the darker elements of their world building. Sure, there might be actual demons that the Rangers are fighting, but the demons are still gonna be big, kinda silly cartoon monsters. It's not like Power Rangers would ever do a villain that's, say, a straight up Necromancer who animates the bodies of the dead, forcing their souls into torment as he puppets them around and makes them fight the people they once called friends and allies, right? No, Power Rangers would never do that. Unless we're talking about the comics, then they absolutely would. I'll just put it bluntly, the Power Rangers comics are great, and I highly recommend reading them if you haven't. My usual pitch for these is that they are not written for the same young audience as the show is, rather, they are written for people who watched the show as kids and are now looking for something with the same vibe, but taken a little bit more seriously. That's not to say that they are dark and gritty and edgy and annoying though, quite the opposite. The Power Rangers comics are still Power Rangers and still have the awesome over-the-top tokusatsu feel. They can just get scary sometimes if they want to, and the Death Ranger is one of my favorite examples of that. To understand exactly who the Death Ranger is, we need to do a very quick bit of background on a larger group within the Power Rangers comics, that being the Omega Rangers. See, the Power Rangers comic does quite a bit. It began as kind of just a modern-day retelling of the original Mighty Morphin show, with the same characters and concept, but set in the 2010s with less of a budget limit and more detailed storytelling. And then it ran constantly for 7 years, plus it got a couple of spin-off series. So as things continued, more and more characters got added. Now, this is going to be a brief summary of a much larger arc, so we could get to the Death Ranger stuff that you clicked on the video for, but as things went on, they eventually added so many members of the Mighty Morphin team that they split a couple of them, specifically Jason, Zach, and Trini, plus some comics original characters, into another group that went off into space to protect worlds beyond Earth. This is where we get the origin of the comics original team. After being chosen as worthy universal defenders by a being named the Blue Emissary, which is basically like a Power Rangers cosmic god, you're just gonna have to accept that as true for now. I have a video about them in the pipeline, so stay tuned. These 4 characters are chosen to be the newest iteration of the Omega Rangers. The Omega Rangers are alchemy themed, which is a very cool concept for a Power Rangers team, and are based around the 4 classical elements of earth, fire, air, and water. They even have nods to the original alchemical symbols for these elements in their designs. You can see if you look close on their helmets, some of the triangles are facing up and some are facing down. That's because they match with the alchemy symbols. Cool as this is, it is a little bit odd, especially for the pattern that Power Rangers has established over the decades. Why are there 4 of them? Power Rangers teams are usually 3 or 5, or more than 5. At that point, it kind of just becomes a no man's land of however many colors the writers can think of, but beginning with 4 is very rare. The easy answer would just be that it serves the whole alchemy 4 elements thing, but oh no, one of the main jobs of the Power Rangers comics is making sure that Power Rangers lore actually makes sense, so they don't hand-wave things like this. The real answer is that the Omega Rangers did not start with 4 members. And yeah, I know there's 4 Omega Rangers in all the pictures that I'm showing you right now, but the thing is that, this is not the start of the team. The Omega Rangers are not new. The Blue Emissary states that the morphers they are now wielding are some of the oldest in existence, having been created thousands of years ago. This is the lore reason why they are alchemy themed. They're meant to be from the early days of people understanding the Morphin Grid, before they really understood the science behind it and treated it as a form of magic-like alchemy. The idea of Power Rangers from thousands of years ago with alchemy powers is a pretty cool Chekhov's gun, and so of course we would shortly see a comic book exploring this original Omega Ranger team. This, 6 minutes into the video, is where the story of the Death Ranger finally starts for real. The original Omegas were very non-traditional as Ranger teams go, though I guess they were established before a lot of those traditions were. In fact, they kind of operate a little bit more like the Guardians of the Galaxy as opposed to what you think of when you think Power Rangers. Rather than being based out of and protecting one specific city or planet, the Omega Rangers protected a wide region of space, going wherever they were needed. They also represented a wide region, with each member of the team being from a different alien species. Now, most of this team has only appeared in this one comic, so we don't know too much about their individual histories, but I will go into them individually regardless. The first Omega Red was... not you, get out of here. The first Omega Red Ranger was a man named Bledsoe. Omega Black was named Apathy, a humanoid, but one who had some dinosaur-like features, which looks very cool when he's morphed. I love the sort of reptilian body plan on a Ranger, very scary. On the other side, the most humanoid of the Rangers was Omega Yellow, named the Purim, who was basically just a human, but with a third eye. Then there's Haza, the Omega Blue Ranger, who had prehensile, tentacle-like hair. And finally, the fifth one, Omega Gold, the most developed of these characters for, well, I can't imagine why. Surely nothing's gonna go wrong here. Omega Gold was named Spark. I'm kind of taking a random shot at that pronunciation, but it is spelled S-P-A''ARK, so I think Spark is right. Addressing the team's theme real quick, I mean, Alchemy Rangers, Gold Ranger. It shouldn't surprise anybody that the Omega Rangers had a gold one. Making gold was like one of Alchemy's biggest deals. The symbol on Spark's helmet is a circle rather than a triangle though, and this is because it represents the alchemical symbol for the sun. I don't believe that Spark's species is ever given an official name. However, we do know their home planet is called Avidius, so I'm just going to call them Avidians for the sake of convenience. The Avidians have a very cool, unique ability, but one that's going to cause Spark specifically a lot of problems. The Avidians possess an interesting form of hive mind or collective consciousness referred to as the Legacy. The Legacy connects all of them constantly, drawing from a shared pool of thoughts and memories, but not thoughts and memories of the living. The Legacy is made up of the dead. When an Avidian died, they wouldn't just stop existing. They continued to be around in some form, just not physically. Their consciousness would exist only in the Legacy, meaning that they could still participate in Avidian society. This meant that the species as a whole didn't really have a concept of death, at least not in the same way that other species do. In a very cool bit of world building, the Avidian language didn't even have a word for death, not one that translates directly. This makes a lot of sense. For a species that does not stop existing after the physical body has perished, existence in death would probably last longer than existence in life. Thus, an Avidian's time was divided between two periods: the Legacy, after quote-unquote death, and their time on the physical plane, which was referred to as the Living Journey. All of this is very cool so far, but one of the big issues with the Legacy is that I don't think it's magical. This seems to be written as a biological feature of the species, which is why I call it a hive mind. The Legacy appears to be powered by the brains of many Avidians in close proximity, and if one of them gets too far away from the rest of their kind, they lose connection to it. This is the issue that Spark was facing. Their time on the Omega Rangers took them very far away from Avidius and outside of the Legacy's reach. While this isn't lethal or anything, it was extremely jarring and depressing. Growing up in that environment where you're connected to all your ancestors and suddenly not having that anymore, it causes a lot of isolation and loneliness for understandable reason. Spark did have friends, though. They were close with the rest of the team, and particularly with Haza, until, well, this video's about a character called the Death Ranger. Somebody's gonna have to die. The fateful day begins with the Omega Rangers in their extremely awesome geometric arcana-looking Zords fighting a cosmic entity called Sister Supernova. Very Power Rangers name, but like I said, even though this comic is more serious, it is still silly Power Rangers vibes. This entity is extremely powerful, but after a long battle, the Omega Rangers are able to bring her down and return to the nearby planet for some much-needed rest. This is where we get a nice conversation between Spark and Haza, which is also where all the Avidia world building from just a minute ago comes from. Their conversation is cut short, though. You know how the villain was called Sister Supernova? I promised you that the Power Rangers comics don't hand-wave anything. Everything is part of the lore. And the silly Power Rangers villain name was too. Apparently, the name of this entity was mistranslated. she was not called Sister Supernova. She was a supernova sister, and there's another one. The second supernova sister, apparently having sensed something happening to her cosmic twin, attacks the Rangers like 15 minutes after the first, and not expecting to have to do round 2 so quickly, the Omega Rangers are caught very unprepared. They don't even have time to complete their morphing sequence before this monster power slams into their base, killing Haza immediately in the process. And my god, her death is surprisingly graphic for Power Rangers media. I mean, her blood is like a greenish blue, that's probably how they got away from it, but dear lord, that is the entire hole through her chest. Poor Haza! Making this even worse, this happens like right next to Spark. They are a few feet away from one of their only friends when she gets completely impaled. But weirdly, they aren't like too torn up about it. They're not happy that Haza died, but they don't seem as concerned as you would think anybody would be in that situation. Until some things start to sink in. You can kind of tell where this is going. The Rangers are able to beat the second supernova sister, but this is the first time that Spark experiences death that actually means the person is gone forever. Previously, they would just go into the legacy, and yeah, that's a sad thing. They're not going to be around physically anymore, but they are still around. Haza is not. While this experience was uniquely traumatizing for Spark, it was bad for everyone. All the Omega Rangers are very traumatized, and that means that none of them are really psychologically equipped to coach this alien through their first experience with death. They're all grieving, and so all those negative feelings feed into each other and escalate the situation substantially. This leads to Spark not processing their grief at the situation in a healthy way, like something that you process and heal from over time, but rather as a problem that can be directly addressed and solved. Once more, we return to the alchemy theme. Gold wasn't the only goal of alchemists. A lot of them also tried to make life. Researching the Morphin Grid and channeling that through ancient mysticism, Spark manages to summon an elder god, basically, an eldritch entity in the very Lovecraftian sense of the word eldritch. This thing is essentially just a giant living portal that manifests as a mouth which goes somewhere. It's never explicitly confirmed where the mouth goes, but you can probably make some educated guesses based on where this video is going to go. This thing shows up to the planet that the Rangers are on, they go to battle it, but right at the start of the fight, Spark flies suspiciously close to this eldritch monster, and then just kind of hangs there for a second, shoots it, and suddenly the monster is weakened enough that they can capture it. All of this is incredibly suspicious, of course, and I do really like the way they handle that suspicion in the comic itself. I feel like the trope here would be that nobody notices, but no, the other Omega Rangers call out what Spark was doing immediately. The Black Ranger's like, yo, why'd you go so close? And Spark kind of gives a half-assed answer about how to secure victory they needed to get in closer. And then it zooms in on the Red Ranger, and he's like, but you had a gun. Like, he's whispering to himself that he knows that's not true, because why did you need to get that close if you had a gun? Which, yeah, that feels like an authentic way this interaction would go. Point is, the other Rangers can immediately tell that something is amiss here. Spark is acting weird, and the godlike being went down in a few minutes. Nothing is adding up, and so they start looking into what exactly Spark has been doing. Unfortunately, this was not the beginning of Spark's experimentation, it was close to the end of it. The Galactic Maw was not there to teach Spark how to resurrect the dead. They had already figured that one out, actually. The only missing piece of the puzzle was how to power mysticism of that level. That was what the Maw was there to provide, and with that handled, Spark was ready to launch their plan. The other Rangers follow Spark's trail, which they actually left intentionally. Remember, at this point, Spark still does not think they're doing anything bad. At the end of the trail, all the Rangers, including Haza, reconvene. This seems great at first, right? But the other shoe's about to drop, because of course it is. Though, you might think that this is going to go in the classic necromancy trope direction where Spark has resurrected Haza's body, but not her soul, so she's like a mindless husk, or maybe like an evil rampaging version, something like that. No. There are some lines in this comic which establish that Spark's power is way scarier than I was originally expecting it to be. When Spa'ark brings somebody back to life, it does restore that person's real actual soul. That is said explicitly on the page. However, this won't really stick without outside interference. The souls will just not remain in the body and go back to wherever they were. So to keep the soul in the body, Spa'ark has to exercise direct control over them. This is presented as a problem. Spa'ark is working on fixing this flaw in their little scientific equation. But yeah, for now, Spa'ark is basically resurrecting the dead and then mind controlling them as well. The other Rangers find this out when the Black Ranger, who was the most impulsive of them, kind of loses his cool for a bit on seeing what Spark has been doing and tries to attack. Then Spark makes the now restored Haza defend them instead, and Haza's like actively trying to apologize for attacking her friends as this is happening, but she can't control herself. Jesus Christ! This is insane enough that things spiral into an all-out fight, leading to Spa'ark morphing into the Death Ranger for the first time, and also giving us a little bit more information on how canon Power Rangers necromancy works in the process. When a Power Ranger morphs, they are doing so by drawing energy from another dimension called the Morphin Grid. I'll go into some quick details here. If you want the more in-depth explanation, I have a whole video just on that topic. But for now, the Morphin Grid can be used to power pretty much anything. A lot of technology and a lot of magic in the Power Rangers universe draws from this same source, because the distinction doesn't really matter. Since the Morphin Grid can be accessed in such a wide variety of ways, it can also be accessed by souls occasionally. However you want to define life energy, it's treated a lot of different ways in fantasy and sci-fi media. Power Rangers does usually characterize it as a form of energy. Given that, you can access the grid through your own life energy, and also, if conditions are right, pull life energy out of the grid. This is the forbidden ancient technique that the Cosmic Elder God taught Spa'ark how to use. By modifying their morpher, they can now use it to pull life energy directly out of the Morphin Grid and forcibly infuse it into nearby corpses, resurrecting them, and because they're also connected directly to the Morphin Grid, forcing the souls back into their bodies. Now, the first time we see this power used, it's happening in a graveyard, because this is where Spa'ark went to dig up Haza's body. So, of course, they use the morpher to revive all the other corpses. We get a cool shot of Power Rangers fighting zombies, but the tide is turned not by any of the Rangers, but by Haza herself. After an internal struggle, Haza is able to summon enough willpower to break out of Spa'ark's control and stun them. Now, she did not intend this to be lethal. She understood that this was coming out of Spa'ark's bad processing of grief, and she genuinely wanted to help her friend. But in the process of this, she unintentionally stumbled upon the Death Ranger's main weakness. When the Death Ranger brings back a body, they bring back the soul every time, even if that body is a long-dead, rotting corpse. And when Spa'ark's concentration broke for even a second, the long-dead, rotting corpses immediately turned on them, overwhelming them, taking their blaster, and shooting them through the chest. This blow is lethal, not enough to immediately kill, but enough to break the Death Ranger's morph state, leading to an extremely sad scene, and not one that has a happy ending. With the last of their energy as they actively bleed out, Spa'ark has a full-on mental breakdown about their failure, eventually collapsing next to the once again dying Haza, and they both perish right there. And that's not even the end of this comic. Making things even sadder, remember, Spa'ark is an Avidian, and the Avidian legacy is not a magical Morphin Grid thing like the Death Ranger powers are. As Spa'ark dies, they are too far away from other members of their kind for their mental patterns to get absorbed into the hive mind, meaning that they would just perish and vanish into nothingness, if it wasn't for the magic that they had already tampered with. Without the legacy present to peacefully take the consciousness, Spa'ark's now even more traumatized mind gets funneled into the necrotically charged morpher that they had modified, creating a far more powerful magical artifact that won't be a big villain problem for anybody in the future, no! After this whole incident, the 3 remaining Omega Rangers continue being heroes, though it does take them a long time to heal. They eventually replace Haza and get a new Omega Blue, but Omega Gold is now off the table forever. The Morpher is extremely corrupted, and they also probably shouldn't destroy it since who knows what energies could be released. So, without a lot of other options, they simply seal the Morpher away, quote, to keep Spa'ark safe and keep the dead safe from Spa'ark. Now, with the powers of the Death Ranger safely contained where no bad guys can reach them, and that actually is a true statement, no bad guys are going to reach them, we can zoom forward thousands of years to the present and another team of Rangers. While the Power Rangers comics did not move through the same progression that the 90s did with Mighty Morphin, Zeo, Turbo, etc., they would occasionally cover other teams of Rangers that existed out in the universe, and one of those teams was the In-Space Rangers. The short time the comic spends with this team doesn't focus on all of them. The main characters are really just Andros and Zane, the Red and Silver Space Rangers, respectively. These two actually have a whole one-shot comic dedicated just to them called Countdown to Ruin, which does a fantastic job of exploring their backstory and dynamic with each other. Andros and Zane are not explicitly confirmed to be dating in the comics Power Rangers continuity, but it's implied. It's implied very heavily. Andros does straight up say that he loves Zane, and yes, I know there's many types of love out there that's not necessarily romantic, but then I will raise you the immediate next panel where Zane is doing the finger-touching meme as he looks at his hot space boyfriend. There's no straight explanation for that. They're very cute together, I love their vibe. Anyway, this happens 2 pages later. Zane jumps in front of an attack that was meant for Andros, saving him, but I mean, that doesn't really look like a survivable blow. This actually parallels some events from the original In-Space show. In that older version, Zane also takes a blow meant for Andros and is heavily wounded, but then he gets put into cryosleep and is woken up later, because that's a show for very young kids, so they're not just gonna kill off characters. The comics aren't for young kids. Zane dies in this one. Andros doesn't get a moment to rest after this either, because as he's fighting the monster that killed Zane, his homeworld of KO-35 is coincidentally attacked, he can't make it back in time to help, and the entire population of his home planet is killed. Andros does not have a good time in the Power Rangers comics. Once again, this is just an edgier parallel of the original In-Space events. In that one, KO-35 was enslaved by aliens. On this one, they're not around to be enslaved. So Andros goes on a big angsty revenge arc. Now, at this point, you might be wondering how the Death Ranger relates to all this. I've kind of gone on a tangent, but I'm about to loop that tangent back in by telling you some information that I have withheld up to now. You know how, like, most of the video up to this point has come from a single one-shot comic, which talks about the first Omega Rangers and therefore the origin of the Death Ranger? Yeah, what that story was in-universe was like a spooky bedtime story. And as we can see from the beginning and end of that comic, that bedtime story was being told to a young Zane and Andros. Years later, after Andros' not officially boyfriend, but we all know what they were, died, he remembers this story and basically thinks, well, if Power Rangers and the Morphin Grid and everything are real, this might be too. So he does some digging and finds a vault in which the powers of the Death Ranger might still be stored. He gets himself an emo stealth suit, breaks his way in, and his guess is correct. This is the resting place of the Omega Gold Morpher. I told you no bad guys were gonna find it. It was just one very sad ranger. Spa'ark, who is still entirely conscious within the Morpher, goes on a big, scary villain monologue about how they were once chosen to protect the universe for all time, and that business is still unfinished, and they and Andros are alike because they have both experienced a loss that brings with it the power to reshape worlds. All this probably should have been a red flag, but Andros is not really listening to reason at this point. And then shortly after this, Zane is back. Hooray! That's probably just a good thing with no problems, right? The two then go meet up with the Omega Rangers as they fight some bad guys, and everything seems great on the surface. Andros is fine, he has a new friend, this is awesome. And then Zane, or who seems to be Zane, says one of the scariest lines in this entire series. See, The other major arc that was going on around this time was the Red Ranger, Jason, like the original Mighty Morphin Jason, dealing with the death of his mom. That was a very recent thing. Just 2 issues ago, the cover of the comic was her funeral, so he was very much still in that grief. And when he asks the Silver Ranger if they know each other, he responds, "I know you. I have seen your life and your death, and I see your mother now." This alien that he had never met talking about his mother who had just died is, it's concerning, and I would say reasonably so. And it just gets more concerning as Definitely Not Zane blows up a ship full of people who had surrendered. This kinda shocks Jason back to reality, and he immediately confronts the others about what the hell is going on, where we learn that Andros actually knows exactly what's going on. Obviously, the person in the space silver suit is not really Zane. That is the soul of Sparks, and Andros is fully aware of that. Remember, his emo arc was not only spurred by the death of his not officially boyfriend, it was spurred by the extinction of his entire planet. He wasn't getting the Omega Gold Morpher just to restore life to Zane, he was trying to restore his entire people. Unfortunately for everybody, the Death Ranger is, completely insane. And so when Jason starts to turn Andros on the whole plan, Spark straight up stabs him through the chest. And this is a lethal blow. We know for a fact that Jason dies here. Though, in the presence of the Death Ranger, that isn't like a lasting thing. Murdering Jason was not only to get rid of a problem to the plan. Spark needed, in their own words, a more powerful host, and apparently stacking Omega Morphers is far better for that. So Not Zane takes the Morpher off his hand and puts it onto Jason's. Spark's primary consciousness is transferred over, reanimates the body, and morphs using both morphers at the same time. Canonically a very dangerous thing to do, but I don't think the Death Ranger was super concerned about safety, and turns Jason into a new, corrupted version of the Omega Red Ranger, which I have to admit, looks incredibly cool. Andros, too traumatized and shell-shocked to turn back, lands his ship on the ruins of KO-35, and the Death Ranger does what they do best, resurrecting the entire population as a massive horde of alien zombies. The other Omega Rangers quickly show up to the scene, having received a last-minute distress call from Jason before he got stabbed, and then lose the ensuing battle. The Death Ranger is now incredibly strong, and they are not very happy to see their old team restored in a new incarnation. That just kinda makes them fight harder, and the Omegas don't seem to survive this. When we next see the Omega Rangers, all of them are under the Death Ranger's control at once. You can tell because they all have the skull detailing under their helmet. And, the Death Ranger has never demonstrated the ability to control the living. While it is never officially stated on the page that Spark methodically kills all of the Omega Rangers and then brings them back with necromancy, it does say they do that to Jason. That's definitely what happens. And presumably that is the same process that happens to everybody else. And need I remind you, we do know from solid information on the page that when Spark uses necromancy, they are yanking the souls of the deceased out of the underworld, forcing them back into their decaying dead bodies, and then puppeting them around, making them do whatever evil deeds the Death Ranger wants. And that happens to, like, most of the main characters in this book. They even kill the cat. Yeah, there's a cat on the Omega Rangers team. He is an alien cat, but not like a super intelligent one. He is an animal. The original Omega Blue Ranger was evil, and so they ended up switching her out. That's outside the scope of this video. Point is, they have a cat, and Sparks kills him and turns him into a zombie. This means that the Death Ranger is just absolutely terrifying on several levels, which does make a lot of sense for the type of villain they were supposed to be. All of this was the lead-up arc to the 100th issue of Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. The Death Ranger was an anniversary villain. Issue 100 is kind of light on plot. Most of it is just one gigantic sequence of fight scenes. But yeah, it's a Power Rangers anniversary. Of course, they're gonna take that excuse to get in as many cool fights as they possibly can. The Death Ranger gets a bunch of scary villain monologues. There's a big team fight between the Mighty Morphin Rangers and the zombie Omega Rangers. There's a lot of 1v1s. Andros and Zombie Zane have a fight. Zombie Jason and Tommy have a fight. We also get to see a little bit more of the Omega Gold Zord. The Omega Ranger Zords already look extremely cool and esoteric, but when the Death Ranger adds the Gold Zord to it, it basically becomes a giant angel-inspired one, which makes a lot of sense. The thematics of this team are fantastic. The Rangers are not really winning in this fight either, and just as all is about to be lost, the day is saved by Andros, who also kind of caused all this, but hey, he's making up for it now. Right as Sparx is about to transfer possession over to Tommy, gaining even more power in the process, Andros tackles them and overloads his morpher with red energy, which sort of blasts all of their consciousnesses into the morphin grid for a second and allows Andros to talk to Jason. This is where the comic stops being a fight scene for a bit and actually does a very nice emotional conclusion to Jason's arc over the last several issues. While he was being possessed by the Death Ranger directly, Sparx was not allowing his consciousness to be aware, and rather had put his mind into like a simulated memory so that his will would not fight back. Very important thing to note here, even this far along in the story, Spark does not see themselves as evil in the slightest. They genuinely see what they are doing as a gift that they are trying to give to the universe. So, with that in mind, it makes perfect sense that the strongest of these mental cages that Jason was in was a recent memory. A false memory, of course, but one in which his mother was still alive. This puts Jason into a very similar dilemma to what the Death Ranger themselves had faced so long ago. He could just stay here, right? The Death Ranger's magic is powerful. Jason could have lived in this memory with his mother for as long as he wanted. But he's not going to allow himself to get stuck like Spark had done. He's a ranger, he has things to do, and there are people out there still living that he has to protect. So after being made aware of the situation he is trapped in, he breaks his way out, purging the consciousness of the Death Ranger from his mind once and for all. The Omega Gold Morpher is shattered in the process, releasing Sparx's consciousness. The Omega Rangers are freed from their control, returning to life. How exactly this happens is never really explained, but also they're Rangers, they can heal faster thanks to their grid connection. The people of KO-35 do not get restored to life. Their zombie bodies just crumble, once again confirming that the Death Ranger controls corpses and doesn't just possess people directly. Andros and Zane, almost get a happy ending? Kind of. Zane survives, though he is gravely wounded. Billy says he might be able to wake up again if he absorbs enough morphin grid energy through a system that they set up for him, and then Zane never appears again. So, I don't know if he survived. It kind of seems like he didn't. The comic is not quite over at this point, though. Emotional conclusions to arcs are great, and the comics definitely need that, but this is also Power Rangers, so they do need to deal the final blow with a big cool sword. Even though the Gold Morpher was shattered, Sparx's consciousness was able to transfer to the Gold Omega Zord that they had summoned, and so now they have a big Zord, and the Rangers form all their stuff into a big Zord, and yeah, we get the big Zord fight and final Sword Slash, which destroys the Death Ranger's last remaining link to the physical realm. So now they're gone once and for all. The Death Ranger's attack was not without lasting consequences, though, as this 100-issue special also served as a temporary exit to the series for Jason. He had been in almost every issue up till this point, but apparently, when purging the Death Ranger's mind, he had to sever his connection to the Morphin Grid, so he could no longer turn into the Omega Red Ranger, and they end up promoting Trini to that role. This is an excellent finale to the Death Ranger's little arc, with Jason confronting his own grief to defeat them and all that. It is not the end of the Death Ranger's appearances in this series, however, but the remaining few are very, very different in tone. The Death Ranger showed up very briefly in the last arc of this series as a whole, a really, really big production called Darkest Hour, which was basically like the Avengers Endgame for this Power Rangers universe. Everybody shows up here. There's a bunch of Ranger teams, most of the comics' original villains come back, and the Death Ranger returns as one of them, having been given a new body by dark magic cast by Rita Repulsa and Dark Spectre. They're not, like, really important to this arc, I must admit. Rita recruited Sparks because they were very good at expanding their armies by just kind of taking over Rangers that they had killed. Apparently this did work at least a couple times. The Death Ranger killed the Wild Force Rangers and they're villains for this arc, so sorry to Wild Force fans out there, they didn't last long. Now, I should say before I get to the next part, I do like Darkest Hour. I think that on the whole, it's a very fun arc. I don't like the way that they handle the Death Ranger at the end of it, though. They do something kind of cool by establishing that the Death Ranger flips sides and joins the heroes, not really because they are good now, they still are going on their never-ending quest to end death at all cost, but they're mad that Rita was taking advantage of them, and so they're willing to go and join Zordon. This would be a neat idea. After all, Sparks was a good guy originally, so a redemption arc would be cool. And then it never goes anywhere, and the next time the Death Ranger is seen, they try and sneak up on Dark Spectre, who was the arc's main villain, and it doesn't work, and their neck gets snapped, and then they're gone. That aside, though, if you just kind of don't look at the ending of the arc, the Death Ranger is a fascinating character and is a great example of what Power Rangers media can be when they are not bound by the kids' show limit. At this point, it's kind of a running joke on my channel that all of these serious Power Rangers stories come down to one central theme, that being escalation. This is the core moral that Power Rangers loves to come back to, and it usually does a pretty good job handling it. Some Power Ranger stories are about how you shouldn't escalate situations because the violence is only going to lead to more violence. However, it also acknowledges that you do sometimes have to be violent in order to protect people and preserve justice. The story of the Death Ranger leans more towards the first one of those, but it approaches it in a different way. The Death Ranger exists as a lesson that some things just cannot be fought with at all. There is no correct or good level of escalation when you're dealing with death. Trying to push back against that is only going to cause more problems, and there's no other outcome. The one who dealt the most important blow to the Death Ranger in the end of things was Jason, not by literally punching him, even though that's what it was represented as in his mind. The actual blow was him accepting what had happened, moving on past the tragedy, and not letting that consume him like had happened to Andros and Spark originally. And you know, as I think about it while recording this video, maybe the Death Ranger's actual death did kind of work to serve that theme. If they were given a full redemption arc, it would have undermined a lot of the storytelling around them up to this point. The Death Ranger getting a big dramatic finish would have proven their inherently flawed goal kind of correct. Their quest was to defy death to the very end, so in this way, an unsatisfying ending is a satisfying ending the more I think about it. It isn't a happy ending per se. Sparks' downfall did not happen because of inherent evil, it only happened because of repeated trauma. And the moral of their story is that no matter how bad grief may get in the moment, you can't let it consume you and have to keep moving forward. And also the second moral is, maybe don't do necromancy. I don't think there's a world in which that one ever turns out well. Thank you all so much for watching. I know the Death Ranger was a very requested Power Rangers topic, which doesn't surprise me. It is a pretty cool concept, so I hope it lived up to the expectations. I'll keep announcements real quick. The main one, as usual, is that I have a Patreon. If you go and look over there, you can find early and ad-free access to all of my videos, as well as a Patreon exclusive video every month. There's 3 hours and counting of exclusive content over there already. You can find that link under this video on my channel page. My username there is also the same as it is here. It's in a lot of places, and extra big thank you to everyone who already supports me over there. It really does help me continue making these videos for you all, and I appreciate it very much. I also appreciate the artist I work with for these videos, Ruben Perez. He drew the poses of the character you've been watching talk at you for the last however long this video was. I actually have really no idea this time, so please go and give him a look as well. And now that I'm done with the audio recording, time to go do the audio editing and figure out how many times I accidentally pronounced Spark's name as just Spark. There's probably a few of them that are going to slip through the cracks, but oh well, it's not that big a deal. Bye!